thank that speaker for his comments, and to close the debate, recognise the opposition whip from Monash A.
Ladies and gentlemen, there's been a complete false choice presented to you by the government bench in today's debate, because apparently the options before the House today are the alleviation of dire poverty in the third world, but conveniently for the Whip Speaker, only a few people actually fall into this category, versus the could care less attitude that apparently the opposition bench has had in today's debate. Aside from that being a very unfair characterisation of what our opening says, we think it's especially unfair when our extension was about considering the long-term ramifications of this policy and how you best alleviate poverty in a genuine long-term sense in this debate. And they completely failed to engage with the second element of our extension, which was about how the first world has a limited amount of political capital, and how when they are how they can perceive themselves to be paying already in that sense of the word for this type of a development, they won't do it again. And we never heard a response from the Whip Speaker. And maybe that's because maybe he agrees with us, I don't know, but I'll just assume that for the sake of the debate. So let's look at three things. Firstly, I want to look at what's best for the asylum seekers in today's debate, because we don't think it is the saving grace that is being painted by the government team. Secondly, I want to look at this extension about competing rights that we heard from the closing. And very finally, I want to look at how we best encourage long-term development. So straight on to this first point, because what we heard from the Prime Minister is that we want to broaden the scope of refugee law effectively, even though he didn't understand refugee law when I asked it in a point of information. We think that it's a very broad concept that the government bench has established in today's debate, when according to the opening team's words, we're making a promise to everyone. Well, strangely enough, if I was a really poor person in dire economic situations in the third world, you'll have to imagine for a second that I'm not a white female from Australia, ladies and gentlemen, I'd say that when the majority of the developing world falls into the category of the opening government, I'd see that as a green light, ladies and gentlemen. I'd see that as a reason to try and move to these countries, a reality that has been conveniently sidestepped by the government in today's debate. Not only is that the case, and that fits in with our extension, and I'll get to that later on, we think more importantly there is a difference between political persecution and economic severe hardship. We're not going to say that it isn't really crap that these people can't feed themselves a lot of the time. We're not quite that stupid, guys, in today's debate. But what we will say is that there are two defining features. Firstly, we'd say that dire economic hardship exists in the first world already, ladies and gentlemen. That's why you don't see the same need and desire by these people on the ground to help these other people out. We also say that the difference between political and economic hardship is that when your government is sanctioning for you to be killed, ladies and gentlemen, there is a certain degree of immediacy to the harm that we think merits you getting preferential treatment in this scenario. We've asked at a point of information, not only what is the stance with refugee law, are you having any consistent opinion, do you have a criteria? And we've never heard a consistent point of view from the government bench, because they fundamentally have proposed ad hoc refugee law, ladies and gentlemen, without clear boundaries. And that's a very important concept in today's debate when we consider the extension that we brought to you at closing government, because we told you that this, and I'll take you in a minute, creates a direct incentive for these individuals to come to these countries like that doesn't exist at the moment, ladies and gentlemen, because you are broadening the scope tenfold, 100-fold, whatever massive number you want to pick. Go, sir.
So by broadening the scope, if we make it so that it's a better political tool for countries, why would states not want to do this, especially with your sort of arbitrary rights claims going back and forth?
Okay, firstly, that point was a bit confusing, but we'd say that when you broaden it, you make it more difficult for those developed countries to help the developing countries in any substantial sense. You make it more difficult for them to sell to their population that maybe we should drop agricultural tariffs that help contribute to the long-term poverty that we heard from the opening team. You don't make it that politically sound in the long run. That's why your policy isn't sound. We talked in our extension about people smuggling, and the only kind of response we heard was that we just need to crack down harder. I think governments are probably trying pretty hard to crack down at the moment. We'd say even when you do crack down, ladies and gentlemen, as a government, it's too late, because people have already sold all of their possessions. They've already moved millions of miles, ladies and gentlemen, to get to a convenient location. Let's neglect the fact that lots of people die in the process of seeking asylum. They directly increase the occurrence of this, and we don't think that's responsible, especially when they don't get this massive point, it's important to acknowledge that the people who are in immediate harm, ladies and gentlemen, who have state-sanctioned effective targets on their head, are missing out under this policy because part of their bench at least acknowledge that developed countries have a limited ability to accept refugees, and we think that that means that you're missing out on the most in need. Let's look at the second idea about your extension, because strangely enough, we thought the concept of an obligation to humanity sounded very like what the opening government set up. But let's really look at what they said. They said two things. Firstly, they said that rights claims shouldn't be based on arbitrary lines. We acknowledge that, maybe someone had a bit of fun with the Crayolas when they were drawing up the lines for states, ladies and gentlemen, but that's the reality of the scenario that we live in today's debate. And we acknowledge that they are arbitrary to an extent when we help the most in need, when we help people who are seeking political refugee, ladies and gentlemen. We'd say that those borders exist for a reason, and that provides stability in today's debate. In this scenario, we'd say that just because borders are arbitrary doesn't mean that you should automatically change refugee policy that has been the law since whenever someone decided to create the law. I'm not that good on that type of stuff. Let's look at the second idea, because we heard that you have an obligation to humanity, therefore you brought in the concept. What a simplistic analysis that we heard from the closing team in today's debate. Because we said that the best way that you help these people, the best way developed countries fulfill their obligations to these countries in today's debate is through not using up their political capital, ladies and gentlemen, through not turning off people on the ground to their cause, through not having the perception that we've already helped the most in need, so why do we need to continue to do that, ladies and gentlemen? We'd say that that's a very substantial harm. And that leads me nicely to my final point, because I've talked about how this doesn't deliver the long-term development. Let's hear their final kind of saving grace, which was remittances. We firstly don't think that these people will get massive jobs. We firstly don't think they'll get jobs normally because they can't speak the language in these countries. We think secondly, remittances don't work. We don't see them working in situations when Filipino maids go to places like Hong Kong and Malaysia because they don't earn enough money to send it home, or they have to spend it in other ways. It's not the solution for the developing world in today's debate. And I've told you that it doesn't matter about what limited positive message you might send, although we'd say it's not a positive message, because in the long term, the developed world will not pay twice, and the policy of the government is to not only increase the occurrence of people smuggling, but to force people to pay twice, to lose their capital to help the most in need. We're very proud to oppose this expansion.